In just a few days, Trump signed nearly 200 executive orders, withdrawing from certain international organizations and completely overturning immigration and border policies. He even openly threatened tariffs. It's a clear show of force, pressuring others on multiple fronts. Many analysts believe Trump's next move could be to align with Russia against China or to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, both of which would be bad news for Beijing. To counter this pressure, Xi Jinping is clinging tightly to Russia, treating it as his trump card against Trump. Behind this strategy, however, lies a deeper geopolitical agenda. Over the past week, Xi's restless maneuvers have revealed his underlying anxiety. The most notable event occurred on January 21st, the day of Trump's inauguration. On that day, Xi held a rare 1 hour and 35-minute video call with Putin. Following the call, Russia stated that the two leaders mainly discussed opposition to the U.S. Shortly after, Putin declared that Russia still had the resources and resilience to continue the war in Ukraine for another year, signaling readiness for prolonged conflict. Reports suggest that this bold stance stems from Xi's renewed promise of unlimited support, signaling China's willingness to back Russia as a reserve force. China's state broadcaster CCTV played along, emphasizing phrases like a century of global changes and the volatile international landscape. It also praised the stability and resilience of China-Russia relations, framing the partnership as a united front against external challenges. Chinese propaganda was clearly trying to send a message: Beijing and Moscow are fully prepared to face off against the U.S. Many commentators believe these moves are aimed directly at Trump, signaling that Beijing has contingency plans for all possible outcomes in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If the war drags on, China will let it continue. If Russia makes progress, Beijing hopes to draw NATO further into the conflict. Xi seems to be warning the West not to underestimate his alliance with Putin. He's willing to go all the way. This isn't mere speculation. On January 27th, Leonid Reshetnikov, a former general for the Russia Foreign Intelligence Service, claimed on his Telegram channel that Russian officials held an emergency meeting the weekend after Trump's inauguration. China is eager to exploit any opportunity to escalate tensions between Russia and NATO. This claim comes from the Kremlin itself, likely tied to the January 20 video call between Xi and Putin. Many senior Russian officials reportedly believe that Beijing views Russia as nothing more than its quest for global dominance. If that's the case, Moscow might consider aligning with Trump, using an alliance with Washington to counter China. Russian officials admire Trump's decisive style, pointing to his swift handling of Colombia as an example. However, this potential shift depends on a face-to-face meeting between Trump and Putin. During such talks, Washington might present an ultimate plan to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with the outcome hinging on whether both sides find the deal mutually beneficial. If Reshetnikov's claims are true, it suggests that Russia's top leadership is starting to realize that China's goals in the Ukraine crisis differ significantly from their own. Russia aims to restore its traditional sphere of influence, while China wants to keep the West entangled, hoping for a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO so that Beijing can benefit from the chaos. These conflicting motivations have led to mutual suspicion. Despite Russia's bravado, it doesn't intend to completely sever ties with the West. Its economy and military are simply not equipped for a prolonged standoff. The current China-Russia relationship is fraught with suspicion and hidden agendas. Both sides are wary of each other, and escalating tensions could lead to a complete fallout. Xi Jinping, fearing Russia might align with the West, urgently arranged the January 21st video meeting with Putin. Reportedly, Russian leaders now view China as a predatory partner, a sentiment that Beijing has long been aware of. The situation is especially precarious for President Xi Jinping. If China-Russia relations break down entirely, Beijing would not only have to guard against a sudden shift in Russia's stance, but also worry about North Korea taking advantage of the situation. Such a scenario would quickly dismantle Xi's grand strategy, as touted as invincible. Xi's unease was evident in his immediate visit to China's Northern Theater Command after the January 21st meeting. There, he stressed the need for heightened readiness to handle unexpected situations. This command mainly focuses on Russia and North Korea, signaling that China is preparing for potential conflicts or provocations from these directions. Reports suggest that Russia possesses a classified document outlining measures to guard against potential Chinese aggressions in the Far East. These measures include the use of short-range, medium-range, and even intercontinental ballistic missiles, possibly nuclear, against targets in China if relations deteriorate. For Xi, this is a sobering reminder that the so-called friendship between China and Russia is merely superficial, and that Russia wouldn't hesitate to strike first if its interests were threatened. The January 21st call likely reflected Xi's desperation to secure Putin's loyalty. Xi is uncertain about the extent of Putin's private communications with the U.S. and wanted to present a united front to Trump. Both leaders seem wary of the other cozying up to Washington, while quietly signaling their own willingness to align with Trump's administration. After Trump's victory in November, Russia immediately imposed stricter inspections on goods transported via China-Europe rail freight, citing the need to check for prohibited items. This caused Chinese goods to be delayed for over a month. Many believe this was Russia's way of signaling to the West that it wasn't fully aligned with China and remained open to mending ties with Europe and the U.S. Beijing, on the other hand, has also been sending subtle messages to Washington. For example, the Shandong military district reportedly issued an order tightening inspections of goods entering ports, restricting certain sanctioned items from being unloaded. Ports in Qingdao, Ruzhou, and Yantai were all affected. These sanctioned items are typically products blacklisted by the U.S. and EU, which China might otherwise reroute to Russia, North Korea, or Iran. The timing of this order, announced on January 7th, has led many to speculate that Beijing is trying to appear cooperative with Western sanctions to avoid a complete fallout with the U.S. Currently, Ukraine, Europe, and even Russia are keen to end the war, while China appears to be the only player actively stirring the pot. It's no secret to the world. All eyes are on Trump to see if he can offer Putin enough incentives to bring Russia firmly into the U.S. camp. During Trump's previous presidency, domestic political strife, including the Russiagate scandal, disrupted his foreign policy agenda. This time, if he's determined to mend ties with Russia, he could potentially end the Russia-Ukraine conflict quickly. Indeed, Trump is already taking steps to disrupt the China-Russia partnership. He's warned that if Russia doesn't halt its military actions in Ukraine, the U.S. will impose further sanctions on all countries involved or aiding Russia. This clearly targets China, pressuring to fall in line. The Financial Times recently reported that Western intelligence agencies are closely monitoring two cargo ships, the Gulban and the Jairan. These ships departed from Daishan Island in China and are headed for Iran. These ships were reportedly carrying large quantities of ammonium perchlorate, a key ingredient for rocket propellants, in quantities capable of producing thousands of rockets. It's suspected that these materials could ultimately end up in Russia. In short, Western intelligence is keeping a close watch on Beijing's actions, leaving little room for covert operations. At the same time, Trump is pressuring Russia to end the war in Ukraine. Time magazine highlighted that Russia's economy relies heavily on oil, which accounts for around 60% of revenue. If the U.S. increases oil production and drives down global oil prices, it could deal a severe blow to Moscow. Currently, the U.S. produces 10 million barrels of crude oil per day. If production increases by 30%, oil prices would likely plummet. With Brent crude currently at around $70 per barrel, Russia's extraction cost of $44 per barrel, plus transportation expenses that often push costs to $70, leaves little room for profit. Should the U.S. take such measures, Russia might be forced to back down. Meanwhile, Beijing is also caught in a difficult position. On the one hand, it hopes Russia remains bogged down in Ukraine to distract the West. On the other hand, China's economy is already under significant strain. Weak foreign trade, sluggish domestic demand, and internal political and military struggles, exacerbated by Xi's authoritarian policies, have pushed the bureaucracy into a state of passive resistance. With mounting pressure from Western markets and the looming threat of a second trade war providing further support to Russia, Russia could drain China's already stretched resources. Even if Beijing insists on tying Putin to its wagon, the road ahead is fraught with difficulties. Winning could come at a steep economic cost, while losing would be catastrophic. If China's financial and material support to Russia falls short, Putin could turn against Beijing at any time. The mutual distrust between China and Russia is no secret, and a fallout could prompt the Kremlin to target China directly. Moreover, Russia resents being dominated by Beijing, and the possibility of Putin secretly aligning with Trump to counter Russia is not far-fetched. Xi Jinping's ambition to fully control Russia is nothing short of a fantasy. Following his return to office, Trump immediately criticized the Phase 1 U.S.-China trade deal, accusing Beijing of failing to fulfill its commitments. Citing data from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the U.S. highlighted that China only met 58% of its pledged purchase targets, falling short of levels even before the trade war. With such evidence in hand, Trump is poised to reintroduce tariffs on Chinese goods, signaling his determination to hold China accountable. Adding to Beijing's woes, the European Union, historically more restrained towards China, has taken on a tougher stance. On January 21st, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen mentioned China 14 times during her speech at the Davos Forum, sharply criticizing Beijing for not operating as a market economy. She also condemned China's practice of dumping cheap goods and disrupting market order, calling for fair trade. Her rhetoric echoed Trump's during the trade war, essentially signaling a declaration of economic battle from the EU. This raises the prospect of a coordinated US-EU trade war against China. China's foreign trade has long been regarded as its economic lifeline. If both the EU and North American markets close their doors, China's economy would face a devastating collapse. In reality, China's economy is already riddled with vulnerabilities. Profits for its three major energy companies have plummeted, local refineries are closing en masse, and sales of refined oil products continue to decline. The market is in disarray, and Beijing is acutely aware of the severity of the crisis. Even CATL, China's leading battery manufacturer, recently admitted to facing significant challenges. If such a top-tier company is struggling, the situation for others is even bleaker, underscoring the dire state of China's economy. Domestic automotive bloggers have exposed widespread order fraud by certain electric vehicle companies, further revealing the extent of falsified economic data in China. The long-standing practice of inflating numbers to project prosperity is now unraveling. If the U.S. imposes new tariffs, raising duties on Chinese goods to over 50%, the resulting devastation for China's economy would be unimaginable. The Trump administration is accelerating its efforts to establish a containment strategy in the Indo-Pacific, leaving Beijing increasingly strained. On January 22nd, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with foreign ministers from the Quad Alliance, Japan, India, Australia, and the U.S., signaling a renewed commitment to counter China. The Quad, originally formed during Trump's first term with the support of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, is now being upgraded, clearly aiming to encircle Beijing through coordinated efforts by sea, land, and air. Additionally, the Trump administration is bolstering its AUKUS pact. If China's threat continues to grow, the U.S. plans to assist Australia in deploying nuclear submarines, further strengthening the Indo-Pacific security framework. Rubio has also engaged with the Philippine foreign minister, pledging to deepen U.S.-Philippines defense cooperation and fortify the first island chain. Meanwhile, U.S. allies are deploying advanced weaponry, including American Tomahawk cruise missiles and cutting-edge reconnaissance systems in Japan, and advanced missiles in the Philippines. All these developments present tangible military pressure on Beijing. Faced with Trump's series of aggressive moves, Xi Jinping has reverted to his familiar dual approach, outwardly offering olive branches to the U.S. while covertly ramping up military posturing. Beijing has been sending mixed signals, alternating between conciliatory rhetoric and overt threats, reflecting its unease under Trump's assertive return to power. On the surface, Xi has taken an unusually submissive stance, while sending Trump a congratulatory message immediately after his inauguration and repeatedly emphasizing mutual benefits and U.S.-China friendship. He even invited Trump to visit China and make the unprecedented decision to send Vice President Han Zheng to attend the U.S. presidential inauguration. Behind the scenes, however, Xi convened an emergency Politburo meeting on January 20th, calling for an all-out struggle against the U.S. The next day, he held a video call with Putin, and on January 22nd, he visited the Bohai shipyard to inspect a newly built 094 nuclear submarine equipped with JL-series intercontinental missiles. These moves are intended to intimidate the U.S., but in an era dominated by unmanned and asymmetrical warfare, nuclear posturing may not effectively counter the U.S.-led containment strategy. Such threats are more psychological than strategic and unlikely to bridge the technological and power gap. Xi has also instructed his administration to present a unified message to the U.S., offering a potential deal. If Trump publicly opposes Taiwan independence and supports the One China policy, China would be willing to make concessions in other areas. However, analysts view this as merely testing Trump's resolve. The core U.S.-China conflict lies in systemic and ideological differences, which cannot be resolved through transactional agreements. Many analysts argue that China's current overtures are a temporary ploy to delay an impending crisis. If Trump imposes more comprehensive decoupling measures or sanctions in economic and technological sectors, Beijing would face a significant internal collapse. Even staunch nationalist figures like Major General Dai Xu, a leading voice of China's wolf warrior faction, has recently changed their tone. Dai publicly stated, "With China's current strength, it's impossible to confront the U.S. head-on. China must show weakness and seek peace." This indicates that Xi has likely confided to his inner circle that the situation no longer permits escalating tensions with the U.S. Reports suggest that Dai privately admitted Xi also acknowledges that Russia is unreliable and Putin could align with the U.S. at any time. As a result, Beijing may outwardly maintain friendly ties with Moscow while quietly distancing itself. Instead, Xi could shift focus to managing relations with the U.S., abandoning the rhetoric of nuclear confrontation, mutual destruction, and surpassing the West. It's also possible that it could concede to Washington and relinquish the dream of China's great rise to power. Trump is well aware of Beijing's precarious position. By publicly urging Xi to mediate the Russia-Ukraine conflict and emphasizing China's stake in the war, Trump could force Beijing into a more active and riskier role. For Xi, this could be a delicate balancing act, as any misstep could expose or derail his plans to back Russia and destabilize Beijing's fragile strategy. All signs indicate that Beijing is now stuck in a difficult position, resorting to patching one crisis by creating another in an attempt to delay the inevitable. Whether it can withstand Trump's new wave of comprehensive containment remains unclear.